recording.
Greetings. Today we're going to talk about transferable skills for graduate students. I am Chelsea Cervantes de Blois. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Geography, Environment, and Society. I'm here to speak with Jenna and Sharolyn. Sharolyn, could you please introduce yourself?
Thanks, Chelsea. Hi, my name is Sharolyn Kawakami-Shulz. I'm Director of the Office of Professional Development for Graduate Students and Postdocs in the University of Minnesota Medical School. Happy to be here with you today. Jenna.
Hi, I'm Jenna Hicks. I am the Program Manager for the Office of Professional Development, and I'm also happy to be here today.
So I'll start off with asking a few questions to both of you. The first question I would like to ask are, what are transferable skills?
Yes, so transferable skills are skills that are applicable across a wide variety of sectors and position types. And these tend to be fairly big picture or broad skills. We find that often graduate students think that their skills are limited to the tasks that they do on a day-to-day basis. For example, specific technical skills, writing research manuscripts, or maybe supervising junior team members. But really, this is only part of the skills picture. So it's important to distinguish between these specific technical skills or daily tasks and the more broadly applicable or transferable skills. Examples of transferable skills include things like problem solving, critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and management. And these are just to name a few. There are many others as well. And graduate students are very likely developing these skills and other skills over the course of the daily tasks that they complete during their PhD training. So it's important to consider not only the day-to-day activities as well as these broader skills.
Thank you for that. So I have a follow-up question then. How do graduate students develop transferable skills? And what are some examples of transferable skills that graduate students have developed during their time of training in their studies?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So as Jenna mentioned, someone's experience as a graduate student here at the U means that they are developing or have developed transferable skills. So one thing we see when we're talking about transferable skills is that students may lack the confidence that they have skills that are applicable outside of their current research environment. So one thing, before I talk specifically about examples of transferable skills and how to get them, one thing we really recommend students do to build this confidence is to talk to alumni of their program or professionals who are a few years ahead of them in a career path they are interested in, to hear about how their skills that they're using and developing in graduate training can be applied to another role or environment to really build that confidence. So in terms of some examples of transferable skills that can be applied beyond graduate training, one of the, I think, biggest ones is analytical thinking. So many graduate students work on a project throughout their training. And so if we think about the different stages of work on that project, so developing a timeline, reviewing publications or other scholarly materials, gathering and generating data, doing analyses and producing results, communicating their findings through written and oral work, all of these things, both individually and together, are skills that are needed to manage a project in any field. So individually, each of these skills would be considered a transferable skill, and together they really make up the skill of project management. And so, managing a project requires organization, analytical and critical thinking, and time management. And so again, I just listed a lot of skills, but all of these skills are really valued in the professional workplace. The second one I want to give an example of is communication. So as I mentioned, before, graduate training involves different forms of communication, usually as part of if someone has a dissertation, their dissertation work. Graduate students also have opportunities to gain skills in communication outside of their own work. Chelsea, can you talk a little bit how students can gain these skills through an example of an extracurricular activity?
Yes, of course. So one example, when I was the director of COGS grants program, one of the things that we discussed is that graduate students can be involved in developing communication skills as a grant reviewer. So you volunteer and you learn how to evaluate and distinguish difference of grant budgets, as well as the proposals and the type of projects they propose and the funding they need in order to advance their research. This is an excellent way to show communication skills through written work, as well as communication on a committee that evaluates grants and understanding which one is more meritable versus the other and the reasons why, how they communicated. And then also the applicant itself, going through the process of applying and writing the proposal, as well as that process of learning how to synthesize their work. And then the outcome, if they get the grant, would be then to go to a conference or a workshop where then they would again represent Minnesota and present the research that they're doing here.
Thank you. Yeah, so again, another example of a communication skill that you could get in an extracurricular activity that is really valued in a professional environment. So then I think one other question sometimes students have is, does engagement in these activities provide something that's beneficial for professional development? And I think, as Chelsea mentioned, you know, grant review or submitting grants, all of those are applicable not just in the academic environment that you're in graduate school, but there are roles such as grant review or grants management that you're really gaining skills in through that process that could be applied in a professional environment. So engagement in extracurricular activities can demonstrate, depending on what it is, several transferable skills that are applicable and beneficial to your professional work environment. Another thing I'll highlight is that usually something like COGS or other types of extracurricular activities mean that you're working with people outside of your field. And it's likely that the profession that you'll go on to, you'll need to be able to work with people outside of your research area or your field. And so being able to demonstrate that you can collaborate interdisciplinary across an institution is another really highly valued form of communication. So the third example after those two that I'll give as a transferable skill that graduate students are learning during their training is workplace dynamics. So even though graduate training may be distinctly different from what a workplace may look like, both involve people, and wherever you have people interacting, those involved need to have interpersonal skills to work effectively and move through conflict that will inevitably arise. So where we have people, we have interpersonal relationships, we have conflict. And so graduate students through their training are navigating through relationships with colleagues and advisors. They're learning how to move through these relationships and graduate school, which means they are gaining interpersonal skills. So this is one area where I think graduate students get less formal training, but again, it's invaluable for you being able to advance in your career because you need to be able to work both independently and as part of a team. So, you know, getting this experience working with others and moving through interpersonal challenges and conflict is part of graduate training as well.
Thank you, Sharolyn, so much for that. So then I have a follow-up question after that. So how can graduate students communicate transferable skills? I've explained through the COGS grant example, but could you explain more, expand on different examples or kind of skills that they would develop?
Yeah, so the communication of transferable skills is a sort of a muscle that graduate students are not often asked to flex. And so this is something that, you know, I would really encourage graduate students reach out to, you know, I mentioned alumni, I mentioned a career office if you have one, people who work on resumes and CVs, because this is really a skill to be able to translate what the skills that you're currently using and present them in a way that a professional workplace wants to hear them or can understand them. So Jenna and I often in our work with students will talk a lot about the language of the opportunity that you're perhaps applying to or working to go to, and that language might be different than what you're experiencing in your environment. And I think Jenna is going to give an example of this, but I really want to emphasize that this is really difficult to do on your own. And so use the resources around you and use other resources to have people help you say, how can I learn how to communicate this, because students really do have these skills, and really the gap that we see, as you're sort of highlighting, is how to communicate it. And so again, it's a muscle that you may not know how to flex, so we really encourage you to use resources, look online at resumes and CVs, and use a job ad, for example, if you're applying, to see what is the language that I need to be able to speak. How am I going to be able to communicate that I have these transferable skills?
And if I can piggyback off of what Sharolyn said, I have two strategies that we can recommend when thinking about communicating your transferable skills. The first one is giving really specific examples of situations that demonstrate that you have these transferable skills. And the second one that Sharolyn already mentioned a little bit is sort of speaking the cultural language of the person that you're communicating to. So the language of that discipline, that job sector, or that position type. So providing specific examples of times where you've demonstrated transferable skills is really important, because just claiming that you have whatever transferable skill can sound kind of hollow or unsubstantiated without some sort of data to back this up. So simply stating, I'm an excellent communicator is not very convincing or descriptive if you're not providing an example. So this could be improved by stating an example, something like, I'm an excellent communicator, which is evidenced by winning first place in the UMN 3-minute thesis competition, and I've received X number of dollars of personal grant funding from Y number of organizations. So providing this context and these examples really show, not only tell, your skills. So the second key strategy that I wanted to share is speaking the cultural language of the person that you're communicating to. So by this, I mean describing your experiences and skills in terms that your audience will find valuable. We have seen in our work a lot of examples where the language that is used to describe very similar skill sets varies by organizations. So it's important to describe your skills using relevant language or verbiage in order to clearly communicate your skills. For example, a lot of graduate students have experience teaching and mentoring undergrads or junior trainees. And you can use these teaching and mentoring experiences to provide evidence of your leadership and management skills if you do this with the right language. So just saying grading papers is not as widely relevant as something like provided constructive feedback to junior trainees. Reframing these really specific duties that you've performed so that they're relevant for the audience that you're speaking to is critical. But like Sharolyn said, this is really difficult, and it's something that you need to practice in order to get good at. So reading job descriptions and talking to people who work in the sectors that you're trying to move into are really great ways to sort of learn this language of other sectors and job types. And as Sharolyn said, remember that like any other skill, learning to communicate in this way takes time and lots of practice. So don't be afraid to try it out many, many times to get it right.
Well, thank you very much for both of you for having this interview with me today. It was delightful and very informative. I don't have any other follow-up questions at this time, but thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Chelsea.
Thanks.